Coucou les amis! Hey friends, it's Camden. Thanks for clicking on today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're new to my channel, welcome or bienvenue, as they say in French. I like to make videos on this channel about my life in France, my travels, as well as my teaching journey. I also have a blog called baguettesandbicyclettes.com, so be sure to check it out. I'll link it in the description below. Today I'm going to talk about TAPIF, or Teaching Assistant Program in France. I've already mentioned this program in my blog and in some other videos, but I wanted to make a specific video about it today. Why? Why not? Right now, it's 2020, springtime, and I'm stuck inside because of the coronavirus quarantine, but I thought I'd make the most of it and have some fun making videos. So, just to recap, TAPIF stands for Teaching Assistant Program in France, which is a program for graduates who want to teach and live in France for 7 months. It's a part-time job, which is kind of nice because you still have lots of time to travel and experience France. It also gives you the opportunity to see if you like teaching or not. You will be working as a teaching assistant, so you're going to help teachers plan lessons and have small groups and do little activities with classes. You can also work at the primary or secondary level, and it's all throughout France, as well as some of the French dom-toms like Martinique, Guadeloupe, so that's pretty cool. So why did I choose to do the TAPIF program? Well, in undergrad, I studied French as well as secondary education, so I decided to become a French teacher in the US. But before I did that, I really wanted to spend some time living in France and improving my French because I only studied abroad for 6 weeks during a summer program, which I loved, but I didn't feel like I got that real immersive cultural experience. So when I was in my master's program, I applied for the TAPIF program in the fall of 2016, and I heard back later in April. And the application process isn't super complicated. It's all in French, however, so you have to make sure you have a decent level of French before applying. You have to write a personal statement in French. You also have to have a letter of recommendation about you, like your character, your work ethic, that kind of thing, but also a recommendation to attest to your French level. For example, you could get your French teacher to do this for you. But if you haven't had French classes in a while, another way to show that your French level is at least B1, which is lower intermediate, you can take a test like the DELF or the TCF. But I was in French classes recently, so I chose to have a professor write my recommendation letter for me. Another important thing to note about the application is that it costs $80. On the application, you can also choose your preferences, like where in France you would want to teach and what level of students you would want to teach. For example, I chose secondary over primary because I had experience working in secondary schools and that's the age group I preferred. You can also choose which area of France you want to teach in. There's a list of categories with different cities and you can choose your top 3. And you can also choose how big of a city you would want, like a large city, medium-sized, or a small village. I chose a medium-sized. I also chose the Académie de Besançon as my first choice, which some of you might not have heard of. It's in the east in a region called Franche-Comté, which is south of Alsace and just north of the Alps, right next to Switzerland. I chose this region because it wasn't as popular or competitive as some of the other regions, like the Paris region or the Nice region, which are big cities, and I love big cities like that, but for this program, I wanted something more authentic. So I mean, like, people aren't as likely to think I'm an American tourist and automatically speak English to me, if you know what I mean. So that's why I chose a smaller city. I also chose that region because I thought it would be less expensive than living in a more popular region. Another connection I have to the Académie de Besançon is that I have French ancestors who came from that region. And funnily enough, I was placed in a city called Montbeliard, which is a small little city really close to Switzerland, and that's actually where my ancestors came from. They moved from Montbeliard to Canada, Nova Scotia more specifically, in the mid-1700s because of religious persecution. They were Huguenots, so they made the journey over to the New World, and that's how my family got here. So I thought it was really cool that I got placed there. As I mentioned before, I heard back about my acceptance into the program in April, the spring, after I applied, and I found out where I was going to be placed, which school, what city, and I think it was around July, so it might take a while for you to know exactly where you're going to be. For example, I knew in April that I was going to be in the Académie de Besançon, but I didn't know where exactly in the region I was going to be until the summer. And I was placed in 2 schools. You might get placed in 1 school and maybe even 3 or 4. I think I had a good contract and was placed in 2. One was in a lycée, which is high school, and the other was in a collège, which is like a middle school. I had most of my hours in the lycée, and I only went to the collège once a week. So I was never with the whole class by myself the entire time. That is not what the TAPIF program is. You are a teaching assistant, so you'll only ever be with maybe half the class, that's like 15 students at a time, or with small groups, which is the majority of the time that I was working was with small groups. And the teachers might give you different things to do. They might already have an activity prepared and you just deliver it, or they might ask you to come up with a mini lesson or an activity on your own. And all of these activities and lessons are oral focused, so speaking. That's why they want a native speaker, because they want to help with their accent. They also want you to share your culture, which is pretty fun. So I like to do little games, songs, that kind of thing. And again, games are really, really fun, especially with secondary students. I thought the students were really nice. I think they were really happy to have an American in their schools. That being said, sometimes it was hard to discipline the students because, oh, you're not a real teacher, you're just the assistant, you're still young, you kind of look like us a little bit. So that can be hard. So you have to make a clear boundary that, yes, you are an assistant and you are there to help teach them English and in a fun way, but you're also like a teacher, so you should be respected. So you can ask your host teachers for advice about disciplining students if things get out of hand, if you have trouble. But again, I think it's really important to establish rules from the very beginning and stick to them. I was in a really good situation and I enjoyed working with the teachers at my schools. I think it's really important to have constant communication with them. That way they know that you're not struggling, you're doing well, and if you have ideas, you can share it with them. And also because maybe classes are canceled and you're not sure whether you should go or not. So again, it's really important to keep in contact with your teachers. Luckily, I didn't live too far from my schools. I actually lived in the boarding house in one of my schools. I'll get to that in a moment. And for the other school, I was able to take the bus to get there. And one cool thing about living in France is that they really take care of their workers. So if you're working at a school, they can reimburse half of the fees you have to take for public transportation, whether that be the bus or the metro or the tram. So I lived in the boarding house of my school. What? I know it seems kind of strange, but it was actually really convenient, especially because I could just wake up and walk a few hundred feet and be at my school. I lived in a little apartment, so it was separated from the students, thank goodness. And on that floor, there were other teaching assistants. So I lived with a Spanish assistant, a German assistant, and another American assistant. And we shared a shower, a bathroom, and the kitchen. Some teachers could also spend the night in that same part of the building on a different floor. We had a lovely woman, Jeanette, who worked in the school's canteen, who lived with us in the building and shared the kitchen with us, and we had really good times together. I really enjoyed living with other assistants because we could all figure it out together, and since we were different nationalities, we could all practice our French together. We even decided to cook for each other, so each night of the week, a different person would cook, and we got to discover different foods and cultures. And I think that was one of my favorite parts of the program. Because I lived at my school, the housing was really cheap, 80 euros a month for my rent. Crazy, right? But that's really important, especially with the TAPIF salary, which is not a lot of money. I'd say you get about between 700 and 800 euros per month, which is manageable for 7 months. You should come to France with at least savings. The TAPIF guidelines recommend at least $2,000 in savings, which is really important when you're first setting up your bank, arriving in France, paying for your first month of rent, that kind of thing, as well as groceries, and if you want to travel during the first holiday. For other assistants that do not have the luxury of their school's housing, you can also apply for CAF, which is government aid for housing if you don't make a lot of money. I'll be honest, I did not save a lot of money during the TAPIF program because you do not make a lot of money. You're working part-time, but it is a really good salary for a part-time job, I do have to say. I spent most of my money on traveling because I didn't know if I was going to stay in France, and I really wanted to make the most of my experience there. But there are some ways you can save and even make more money. For example, you can tutor for cash on the side. I know one of my other friends who is an assistant, he made money tutoring. I have another friend who works as an assistant now, and she has her own little tutoring business. You can also teach online. There's a program called VIP Kid where you teach basically Skype type classes to children in China. I haven't tried it, but those are different ways you can save money or earn extra money on the side. Making friends. As I said, I lived with some other teaching assistants and they became my closest friends during the program. Since I lived in a smaller town, there weren't a whole lot of young adults living and working in that area, and it wasn't really a university town either, so I had friends with the assistants I lived with. I also made some friends with the other TAPIF assistants in the region, which was really fun. During the orientations, we would meet up, and sometimes we'd even do little day trips and travel together, which was really nice. I was also friends with the teachers I worked with. It was nice. Sometimes they would invite me and the other teaching assistant over for dinner at their house, and we would meet their family, and that was pretty cool to have a nice French home-cooked meal and cultural experience. We also made friends with Jeanette, the woman who worked in the canteen. She kind of became our French adoptive mother, which was really nice. But if you do live in a bigger city, I think it is easier to make friends. The next year I lived in Paris and I thought it was way easier to meet people. Right? As I said before, you only work 12 hours a week, so you have a lot of free time. Sometimes you don't really know what to do with that free time, but it's actually a blessing. You can get extra sleep, you can try out new sports. I started running and doing yoga, and even I just took little walks around the village for fun. You can also do day trips, especially if your schools are nice, and schedule your classes to be more concentrated. For example, I had Mondays off, so I had a long weekend where I could travel if I wanted to. You also have vacations every 6 weeks. I know, but it's actually really nice for the students because after 6 weeks they get a little wild and need a break. And you do too, honestly. The first vacation is actually not too far after you arrive because the TAPIF assistants start their work contract the 1st of October, and the Toussaint vacation is at the end of October, beginning of November. For that, I didn't really travel too much. Again, I just arrived, I wanted to save my money, and I hadn't gotten my first paycheck yet, so for the first week I just kind of chilled, got to know the town a little bit, and then I did a long weekend trip where I visited my friend Katie in Paris. She was studying abroad in Belgium at the time, so we kind of met together in Paris, so that was pretty fun. The next vacation was the Vacances de Noël, so the Christmas vacation, and I actually went back to see my family in the US because I missed them. living in France is really fun, but honestly, you do miss your family, so I thought it was nice that I was able to go back and visit them for that holiday. Then you have another vacation called Vacances d'hiver in February, and that's usually the ski vacation, so lots of kids go skiing with their families during that time. And so did I. I decided to go on my own little trip. I think I stayed at home 1 week and then I traveled by myself for 1 week. So I went to Annecy, which is a cute little mountain village, and it has a beautiful lake. I would totally recommend going there. And then I also visited Chamonix, which is where Mont Blanc is in the Alps, which was absolutely beautiful, a dream. I have a blog post as well as a video about that trip, so if you want to know more, I'll link it in the description below. And then finally, for the April vacation, I went and visited my friend who was a German assistant in Freiburg, where she lived, and it was really cool. I traveled with the other assistants who were my roommates, and it was super fun. It was nice to see her town. And then we went our own ways for our own vacations. After that, I went to visit my friend Katie, who I said I met up with before in Paris. I went to visit her in Belgium, and she was in Antwerp at the time, so that was really, really nice to see her. So it's really cool if you have other friends studying abroad or doing the TAPIF program as well, because you can link up vacations together. Overall, I really enjoyed my TAPIF experience. I was pretty lucky and was placed in some really good schools and had really nice colleagues to work with. I also had really awesome roommates who became my friends. I lived in a smaller city, which was nice for my first year in France because I really got used to the culture and it wasn't overwhelming like a big city like Paris is. However, I didn't make a lot of French friends during that time because it was such a small city. I did experience some FOMO because I was a teaching assistant and I had already done student teaching and had my teaching license, so I felt like I was doing a job that was too easy for me. But if you're not sure if you would like teaching, this could be the job for you because you can try it out. I didn't make a lot of money, but I did use it for things I really enjoyed, like traveling, which I thought was really special, and I'll have those memories forever. So I would recommend TAPIF, but you have to keep in mind that you do need to save money, especially if you live in a bigger city. Your situation might not be super nice. You know, you might live in a small village or you might be in an overwhelming city. So you really have to be prepared, make friends, you'll learn a lot. So let me know if you have any other questions about TAPIF or life in France. Leave them in the comments below. I'm signing off for this video. Bisous, bisous. Thanks again.